Hello again, John Robertson, your volunteer librarian for Oscar. Still working on this same form, the mood disorder questionnaire. We're now past the eForm generator. This would be number 3 of the videos past the eForm generator, or number 7 of the videos starting right from the beginning of making this eForm. And my goal today is to change the radio boxes and to create a calculator that helps me to figure out what the score is for this patient. Now, technically, you hand this piece of paper to the patient and they would fill it out, and then you would manually have to score it. However, if you were able to perhaps give them a tablet or something like that, you would be able to use the calculators and automatically score it, or you could transfer their written answers over to the eForm and score it for them. So we're going to do a couple things. We're going to change the names and the IDs of our radio buttons. We're also going to get rid of some of this information here so that it's just a radio button. And we're going to actually decrease the amount of information that we have to put into the style. So first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to change the names. And I'm going to change the names from this generic page 1-1 to question 1 yes and question 1 no. That makes more sense if we look at the form itself. So quickly jumping over to the form, we'll see that we've got questions and we've got yes and no answers. And so if we just number these as questions, and I know that there's a number there, but we're going to change things slightly and number these individual questions because that's going to help us to score it later. So we're going to say that this is question 1, and then this will be question 1 yes, and this will be question 1 no, and we'll go all the way down here, and this will be actually a separate category, and then this will be a separate category as well. So I'm just going to quickly switch all of these over. If we go back into our code here, you're going to see that I have now switched the names over to question 1 yes and question 1 no. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the code for the radio box. So back to the old version here, if we go down to the code for the radio right here, this looks at the only one part and gives you a radio function based on the class. We're going to change this slightly and actually decrease the amount of code that we have to have here by changing the names, the yes and no, and then we'll be able to use the radio box that way. And here we have the pared down code for the radio boxes, where we're looking at the information before and after that underscore. So there'll be a name, and then after the name we're going to have yes and no. And as long as the name is the same, they're part of the same group. And then the yes and no makes them individuals, and we will be able to use this radio code. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into our code for the radio itself, and we're going to add some code up there so that we can get rid of some of the repetitive nature of the individual inputs. So back into our previous version of the form and up all the way to the top here. So our radio code is going to have a width and a height. It doesn't have position absolute, and it doesn't have the font size. So in our new code, we're going to put those in once in the top, and then we won't have to repeat them in the code. And if we jump to the new form, we've put position absolute in here, and we've put the font size in. And that means that we can take all of that code out of all of the individual inputs. So looking back at the old code here, if we go down to our individual inputs, we're going to be able to take position absolute out of here. We're going to be able to take the width and the height and the font size out of here. And we're basically just going to be left with the left and the top. And if we jump to our new code here, then the code for our radio buttons is much simpler. It just has left and top in it. Once we've changed this code so that we have these name and ID with the questions and the yes or no, then I went to ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT in a series of questions how to calculate this. So we'll go look at our form again for a moment here. And in the previous session, we did this sidebar that was an accordion. And you'll remember that we put this information in here, but further medical assessment for bipolar disorder is clearly warranted if they answer yes to 7 or more of these first set of questions, and then they answer yes to this question here, and then they choose either moderate or serious for the third question here. So now I'm going to show you what I asked ChatGPT to figure out for me, and we're going to go from there. So in ChatGPT, I asked it to write a JavaScript for me, and I gave it the parameters for all the questions. The questions were numbered 1 to 13, and the input should either have an X or be empty. We checked to see if some of the questions weren't answered and gave you the individual numbers of the questions that weren't answered. And if all the questions have been answered, then we count the total number of yeses and we put it in an input named total 1. So this is what ChatGPT came up with, which is a validate questions and count yes script. Okay. And it showed the errors, and it also checked to see that I had the total 1 input. And then it said, these are the assumptions, and there is a total. So then I said, that sounds good. Now, if the total is greater than 7, I want you to check another question, which is several yes or several no. And if both of those are blank, then we create an alert saying you got to fill that out. And if it's several no, then it hasn't met all of the criteria and the process stops. But if it's several yes, then we move on to the next question, which is the 4 choices for how much: minor, no, minor, moderate, and serious. And then it says, if there's all blanks, please answer it. If it chooses moderate or severe, then it says further medical assessment is warranted. And then it gave me the full code here. And then I said, you know what, let's break this down. It offered the option of making it modular. I thought, you know, that's a good idea. So then it gives me the validate questions, and then it checks question 2, and then it checks question 3. And then it gives me a main code that runs all of the intervening codes. So we validate questions 1 to 13 here, and it counts from 1 until you get up to 13 and looks through them all, and then gives me a total 1, and then it checks question 2, and it alerts me if question 2 hasn't been answered, and then gives me a yes or no, and then it looks it has a way to look at the individual question answers. So just a point here, this is called an array, and the items are placed in it, and they're numbered actually from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, and then there's another one in there, 4. So now I can put this code into my eForm and get it to do calculations for me. So jumping back to my code here, I've put these separate JavaScript functions, I should say, in here. And then at the bottom of the questions 1 to 13, I put a do not print here, and I positioned it to the side, so 760 pixels to the side. And then I put a total question 1 in here, and then I created a button called calculate 1, and the name or value of that button is going to be calculate. And when I click on it, it goes validate core questions, which goes up to that first 13 questions and has a look for it. And then I put below the other 2 questions here, I put another span out to the side, and I named this diagnose. And it is another button, and this runs the main validation. And if you'll remember, the main validation runs the validate core questions, and then once it's run the validate core questions, if the answer is correct, then it moves on to running check question 2, and then after that, as long as there's not a null value, it'll move on to check question 3 for me. And I did add a little bit in here in check question 2. I added here if there's not an X, so for the yes, it's not an X, so they said no. They don't meet the full criteria, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be looking at this patient. So I put an alert, doesn't meet the full criteria, but you should determine. And it also, then you know that it ran, but it ran and it stopped with the alert saying that it doesn't meet the full criteria. And the same with question 3. I put an alert in here. If the X didn't appear in question 3, then it doesn't meet the full criteria, but you should determine still on a clinical basis. So now I have the full code in there, and we're going to have a look at the updated eForm. So now this is the updated eForm, and you'll see that I've put the total in there at the bottom of these questions, and I've also got a diagnose button here. So I'm just going to clear all of these, and then we'll do some experiments to see if the code is working for us. So here now we have the form without any questions answered. And if I were to calculate, it would tell me basically that all of the questions have not been answered. But if I start answering these questions randomly, or not so randomly, and now I try to check, it tells me that I still haven't filled them all out. Okay, so let's go and fill the rest of these out. And that's all the way up to the last one. So now it won't give me an error. And it will tell me that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yes answers. Okay, let's make some of these no and make sure that the calculator is working properly. So that's 5 because I made 2 of the yeses no. And because I only had 5 here, it's not giving me an answer. But if I go up to 7, so it's now telling me that it doesn't meet the full criteria because I said minor here, even though I said yes here. If I put it to be a moderate problem, and then it says that assessment is clearly warranted. So my code is working for me. That is what I wanted to show you on this program. And I would say that we're pretty much done with this form. When I come back, I'll do individual videos for adding things like signatures or faxing code to a form. See you at the next video.